Hello, good afternoon. I'm Elizabeth Stremlau. I am with the Trusted Computing Group. I work as the Supply Chain Security Co-Chair. I currently work for Lenovo as the Supply Chain Security Program Manager, and I'm joined here today by Josh, my co-chair.
Thank you. I'm Joshua Schiffman, a distinguished technologist at HP Inc. I'm a researcher in our security lab, and within TCG, I am the co-chair of the Supply Chain Security Group with Elizabeth, as well as the co-chair of the technical committee.
We are here today to talk about supply chain security and why it's important. Josh, I am the Supply Chain Security Program Manager for Lenovo. Right now, what we look at specifically are intelligent components. So suppliers who have components that could be breached in a specific way. So they're vulnerable to being hacked during the supply chain lifecycle. We are working on making sure that our suppliers have good security in place and good controls in place. Can you talk to me a little bit about supply chain security from your perspective and what you're seeing?
Sure. So the global supply chain that our companies source materials from go all over the world, and we often source components at many different levels of indirection, right? So when we assemble a PC or a server, we are building it from parts that we source from one component supplier who themselves can source it from other suppliers down the chain. So it's important from a supply chain security standpoint to be able to tell where these parts are coming from, whether they're genuine, whether they've been tampered with, and whether or not we can trust them. They're running correct firmware, have good settings, have not been altered in some unacceptable way. And so from a supply chain security standpoint, I understand that there are different regulatory frameworks for assessing security, making sure things are good. Can you tell us a bit about some of those?
Totally. So we currently have new ones that are NIS2 and CRA. The standard that is looked upon right now is ISO 27001, which is information security, that we look at from our suppliers to make sure that at a corporate level, which many people tend to forget, at a corporate level, you need to make sure your suppliers have good IT infrastructures in place and securities in place, because manufacturing sits on top of your IT infrastructure. So if your IT infrastructure is breached in any way, shape, or form, it's going to affect your manufacturing, which would affect your supply chain in that respect. So we focus a lot on ISO 27001, NIST 853 controls. And within the supply chain, we're trying to make sure that our suppliers are aware, just as you said, of their supplier components and how they're coming into their infrastructure and how they're managing them at that point in time before it goes on to the next step or to the end user in the end.
Mhm.
So with those controls in place, we are concerned about suppliers not being aware of where their components are coming from. And how can we ask them, how do you know that your parts are secure, that you're receiving?
Right.
And how can TCG help us with that, perhaps?
Right. So within TCG, we define specifications that define things like hardware security and capabilities, roots of trust. And using those technologies, we can build systems, build components that are cryptographically verifiable. So we can identify what they are. We can track them through the supply chain, so we know the provenance of the component, where it came from, where it's going. And then for end users, they can assess whether or not those devices have been altered in different ways. So TCG technology supports supply chain security controls that you were talking about. And a lot of times when people purchase products, they don't realize that TCG technology is already in those devices. Many PCs, servers, networking equipment have TPMs, have other kinds of TCG capabilities. And so I think one of the things that we can do in our supply chain security work group is really focus on educating the public, developing guidance documentation that can explain what the technology is, how it supports their mission, and then makes it easier to implement those kind of technologies.
It sounds like, again, intelligent components, components that have software firmware on them that are able to be managed and monitored in that respect. Have you ever had an instance where there are people or companies where you're aware that they have this technology installed and they're not using it?
Oh, yeah, a lot of times. It's often, integrated at the lowest levels of the system, at the hardware, at the firmware level. And it's important for people to realize that these are capabilities that they can use to not only tell, again, where the device is coming from, but assess it when they've received it, whether or not it's been altered and modified in any way.
That's true. I hear it's a big selling point sometimes for our customers for TPMs that they have the technology installed and they just forget to actually utilize it afterwards. And when it comes point to supply chain management and we explain to our customers, you have these TPM technologies, it's a learning curve for them. And how do we help them know where to go to utilize these tools properly?
Yep. And I think that's, where our work group comes in, helping build that guidance.